We'll start with Exodus 12, 8 through 10a. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Now we'll go to Mathew 12. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priest? Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Roy. I don't know if he's in here. I don't think he is. All that you're needing, he is. Sabbath is about need. And Roy can sing that in a way that you and I can't sing that right now. So if you're a guest with us today, welcome. We're glad you're here. We are in the middle of a series on the 10 Commandments, 1 week at a time, a commandment each week. This one, we're going to take 2 weeks on this commandment, the fourth commandment, the Sabbath day. And some of you were asking, wait, why 2 weeks on this one? And good question, fair question. 2 reasons for that. First, this is the most challenging of all, and Pastor Everett said this last week. This is the most challenging of all the commandments, not because it's hard to keep. All 10 are hard to keep, right? This one's just uniquely challenging because it takes more work to see how it integrates into the gospel and into the New Testament. We don't have a New Testament passage that says the Sabbath day, Saturday, the seventh day in the Old Testament, equals Sunday, the Lord's Day, the resurrection day in the New Testament. We don't have a one-to-one replacement on Saturday to Sunday. So it makes it more challenging. But what we do find is a lot of continuity between Old Testament and New Testament on this question. A lot of continuity between Sabbath day and Lord's Day. And I don't think that is an accident. So what I want to try to do is put these two things together for you today. And the second reason we wanted 2 weeks for this is because this is just incredibly practical. We need to slow down. Our work and rest cycle, our work and rest rhythms are broken. And we're trying to fix them the wrong way. If you're in your 20s and you're just setting yourself up to climb the corporate ladder, or you're parenting and you've got a couple kids and you're like, wow, there's a lot happening, or you're in your prime work years, you're in your 40s and 50s and you're just grooving, you're banking money and things are great. Like wherever you are, in whatever season of life you're in, it's probably the case that you suffer from the same disease that everyone else suffers from, hurry sickness. We're just in a hurry. Everywhere we turn. We're in a rush. We're overbooked. We're frenzied. We're anxious. We think we're supposed to live this way. And we even wear it as a badge of honor. You're like, hey, how's it going this week? How are you doing? Oh, crazy busy, man. Busy, super busy, really busy. Been a crazy week. You don't know, work is crazy. Like, we almost take pleasure in saying how busy we are. Do you feel that? I mean, that's a thing. It's guilty. Let me ask you this. Is it possible that your fast and furious life is diminishing your capacity to know and love God? Is that possible? Is it possible that your furious pace of life is sort of shrinking you, and you're not really sure why you're here and what you're doing because you're so exhausted? What if the reason your job is unsatisfying, the vacation is never long enough, and your kids are driving you crazy has more to do with the fourth commandment than you ever thought? I want to propose that it does. And I want to talk to you today about how to restore and renew every aspect of your life through a weekly Sabbath rest. How to practice Sabbath on the Lord's Day. You can see me trying to fit these two things together, right? How to practice Sabbath rest on the Lord's Day. 4 restorative habits. 4 restorative habits that originate on the Sabbath day in the Old Testament, but we find continuity in the New Testament of these 4 same habits. And I'm going to try to show that to you. The Lord's Day is not the only day that you'd want to practice these 4 habits, but it is the best day. I think it's the best day. 4 restorative habits. All right, here they are. Rest, worship, play, and mercy. Rest, worship, play, and mercy. I'm going to do my best to get through these. Let's get moving. Number 1, God made me to work hard and to rest well. He made us for that. He made you for that. Rest. You can hear it all throughout the commandment from verses 8, 9, 10, and 11, all the way through. 6 days you shall labor. You were made to work. You should work. Like I tell my boys that all the time. You were made to work. You were made to sit around. You were made to do something productive. You shall labor and do all your... But on the 7th day, it's a Sabbath to the Lord. On it you shall not do any work. You or your servant or your female servant, your male servant, your livestock, nobody. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them. And then he rested on the 7th day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The essence of Sabbath is rest. The essence of Sabbath, the Sabbath day in the Old Testament, and I even want to say in a saving sense, in the New Testament, Sabbath rest. The essence of Sabbath is rest. We work diligently for 6 days and then we stop work for much needed rest. Unlike God, we need the rest. He didn't, but we do. And to rest is to stop your daily income producing labor. Whatever you do to make a living, you stop it 1 day a week. And say, God, I'm going to dedicate a full 10 to 12 hours that could be used for work, and I'm going to replace that with sheer physical rest. Body and soul. Now, don't hear, okay, so I get to veg in front of the TV all day on that day. That's. I think you might be tricking yourself. That's not as restful as you think it might be. Binge watching Netflix might not actually produce rest. What you need is deep restoration. Find out what you need for deep restoration. Body and soul. Take a nap. Sit on the porch with no device. Unplug yourself from your phone and all your stuff. Take the time to read and think and pray or draw or write or walk. Take an easy stroll by yourself. Get out of the house. Find a way to... Sabbath is about sheer physical rest. Don't miss that. Whatever else it means in the New Testament, it doesn't bypass this. Now, it does two things implicitly. The sheer physical rest has two other things, I think, embedded in it, and I want to hit those really quickly with you. Second thing it will do for you, second thing it will do, first one on this list, it's going to dethrone you weekly. And guess what I need every week? To be dethroned. It dethrones us. I'm not the God who works endlessly without tiring. God rested on day 7, not because he was tired, but because he knew we would tire. He made us as finite, dependent creatures. He made us as finite, dependent creatures, but he endowed us with so much intelligence and power and creativity and beauty that he knew we would chase it all week long and not be able to stop. He knew that about you. So he commands. It's not the 10 suggestions, right? He commands rest because he knows you need it. He knows you need something that you yourself don't know that you need because you and I love to enthrone ourselves. So Sabbath rest dethrones us. God is God. We're not God. He made us to bear his image, not take over his world. Second thing that flows out of the essence of Sabbath rest is that it relieves us weekly. It relieves so much pressure. It's like this incredibly important pressure release valve. Otherwise, it's going to explode. It's just so relieving. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Have you found that that's a different kind of exhaustion? I mean, frankly, I don't know where you're at, but I would much rather be physically exhausted because I know I'm going to wake up again the next day. Oh, that felt good. Than to be mentally, emotionally, spiritually exhausted. That's harder to recover from. I am like the 2-year-old that Pastor Everett talked about last week. The 2-year-old who's screaming, deliriously tired, resisting the nap, right? That's us. That's me, not wanting to slow down. Think of it like this. Sabbath rest lifts the curse temporarily. Sabbath rest will lift the curse of our labors weekly. It has a redeeming effect. It relieves the pressure. You take all of your unfinished tasks, all of your deadlines, all of the hard conversations, all of the difficult people at work, your drama and the drama and successes, the wins, the losses. You take everything about your work life every week, pile it up, and entrust it to the Lord. So this is really your job, God, not mine. I'm prone to make it more mine than it is. Entrusting it to the God who redeems every aspect of your work life. It delivers us, it frees us, it sets us free. I was struck by the words, just kind of meditating and memorizing. I hope you're still doing this on the 10 Commandments. And at the very top, at the very beginning, it says, and God spoke all these words saying, and this applies to all 10 of the words. He spoke all these words saying, I'm the Lord who brought you out of the house of slavery. I brought you out of the slavery. All 10 of these commandments have something to do with being redeemed, rescued, delivered from. Okay, so speaking of the one who redeems and saves, let me show you how the habit continues in the New Testament. Flip over to Matthew chapter 12, which we just read together. Linda, thank you for reading that. And in Matthew chapter 12, let me show you how the habit of rest continues as Jesus transforms the fourth commandment. All right? Jesus transforms all the commandments. He fulfills them, didn't come to destroy them. He came to fulfill them or transform them. He does that with this commandment. In Matthew chapter 12, he's enjoying the Sabbath day, emphasis on enjoying. Jesus is enjoying the Sabbath day, walking with his bros through the fields, and they're like, hey, I'm kind of hungry. Protein, carb, combo snack. They get the, and they start nibbling on some food. The Pharisees are hawking them, because that's what Pharisees do, and point out to them that they're breaking the law on the Sabbath. Jesus in Matthew 12 says, have you not read? Jesus is so gentle. Jesus is so gentle and so direct at the same time. Have you not read how David, when he was hungry, and the ones who were with him, meaning the disciples who are with Jesus, how they entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for them to eat, but only for the priests. Have you read about that story? Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath, the priests are ministering in the temple? Are they profaning the Sabbath? And verse 6 is like, it's all right there. Verse 6 is gold. I'm telling you right now, he says, something greater than the temple is here. He's talking about himself. Someone greater than the temple has arrived. Jesus is saying, I am the true and greater temple. I am the true and greater Moses. I am the true and greater David. I am the true and greater Solomon. I am the true and greater Sabbath day. In fact, go down to verse 8, Matthew chapter 12, verse 8. I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is saying, I own the Sabbath day. Not only am I allowed to eat, like I own what this is all about. I love that. I think this is what Jesus is saying. In the same way that Sabbath stops your work so you can see God at work, right? I am inviting you to stop perfecting yourself. Stop earning your way. Let me save you. I'm the Messiah. I came to fulfill all of the promises of the Old Testament. Stop and rest in me. That's what Jesus is inviting everyone to. In fact, if you back up to chapter 11, you can see one of the most famous verses in the Bible about Sabbath rest as it's fulfilled in Jesus. Come to me, all you who are absolutely worn out, heavy laden, exhausted, and I will do what? I'll give you rest for your weary soul. Take my yoke. That's labor. That's labor language. Take my yoke. Walk with me and let me give you something you just absolutely can't do by yourself. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's why I want to learn how to practice Sabbath rest, because I want to enter into the rest of Jesus. The life-giving, stabilizing, settling rest of Jesus. And on top of that, so Jesus is inviting people into that rest daily, weekly, monthly, annually. For sure, in the New Testament, Sabbath rest continues as a rhythm of life because we rest moment by moment in the saving work of Jesus. That's how it's fulfilled in the New Testament. The Sabbath in its truest sense continues as a habit in the Christian life because you're in Christ. On top of that, I also want to add, there is something unique about returning to Sabbath rest with God's people week in and week out as we gather for worship and celebrate the gospel and celebrate the rest that Jesus has invited us into. And that takes us to point number 2, which is worship. God made me to love him and worship him above all things. Worship and love being synonyms. like worship is a restorative habit. Worship is a habit from the Sabbath day in the fourth commandment. If you go back kind of in your mind to the fourth commandment, you'll remember this. Stay in Matthew 12 if you can. I'm going to be back there in a second. But just go with me in your mind, because you remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's the first line in this commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's worship language. Not remember like reflect back on. Remember and treasure. Remember and keep the Sabbath day to make it sacred, because God made it sacred. To worship is to treasure, to keep the day that God blessed and made holy as an act of worship. So here it is in just a sentence. God set this day aside for us and blessed it. Therefore, we give it back to Him as an act of worship, as an offering. And this happens with all the good gifts He gives us, doesn't He? I mean, have you discovered this in the Christian life? That when God blesses you with some kind of good gift, you pause it right at that moment and say, just, Lord, thank you for giving me this. Has this happened to you? You know what I'm talking about? I didn't deserve this gift. Lord, thank you for giving it to me. That's what we do with the Sabbath day. That's what they did with the Sabbath day. That's what New Testament believers do with Sabbath rest as they gather for worship with one another. Lord, I want to make this day an offering to you. In fact, verse 10 of Exodus chapter 20, where the commandment is, says it's a Sabbath to the Lord, unto the Lord. How is it a Sabbath to God? He gave it to us. We give it back to Him as an act of worship. So what's actually becoming an offering is your time. Your time no longer belongs to you. Think about it like this. As the temple was God's dwelling place in space, the Sabbath is God's dwelling in time. So in both space and time, God's presence is known to us, and that presence changes us. That's what happens in worship. God's presence transforms us. So Sabbath rest becomes an act of worship when I discover that my time is not mine. It no longer belongs to me. That's one of the reasons you should engage in worship and in the worship life of a church, is that you're constantly saying 1 day out of 7, my time is not mine anymore. And you build that habit into your life and you launch your week like that. And it changes things. My time is not mine. It doesn't belong to me anymore. God is the creator and giver of time. So God slows us down because He knows what we need. We need to make our time His time. And worship is exactly what Jesus has in mind in Matthew chapter 12. Wouldn't it have been easier when the Pharisees were hawking? Look again at Matthew 12, and they're walking through the fields, and wouldn't it have been easier for Jesus to say, hey, get off me. It's legal to do this. People do this all the time. The gleanings, the side, you're allowed to walk down the side of the field or between the fields, and people share like this. It's, get off me. Like, wouldn't that have been easier? Yeah, but that's not, Jesus is almost always over-explaining something for those who have ears to hear. He's always not over-explaining. He's over-answering. He's giving more. And what's He giving? He's saying Sabbath is about worship. That's why he could have pulled from 100 different examples, but He pulls from the temple examples. He pulls from the presence of God language. He pulls from priestly language. Why? Because worship and Sabbath rest go together. That's what's happening on Sabbath day. So I think it's not an accident at all that Jesus goes to the temple and in the illustration. And He says, this is an act of worship. He's inviting His listeners to embrace Him. Here's what's happening. Jesus is inviting his listeners to embrace him as the fulfillment of every act of Old Testament worship. From Exodus to temple, he is inviting his listeners to embrace him as the fulfillment of deliverance as well as worship, including the Sabbath day. That's why the Sabbath day disappears and then Sabbath rest continues in Christ. Sabbath day disappears for us in the New Testament, but the rest of the saving rest of Christ continues. So the church, as a testimony of the gospel, adopts the Lord's Day, Sunday, the day Jesus' resurrection happened, to say that's like we're celebrating. The reason we celebrate on Sunday is because on Resurrection Day, Jesus secured our eternal saving rest. There is a rest that remains for the people of God, Hebrews chapter 4. So the church worships on Sunday purposefully to celebrate the resurrection and, I think, bring some continuity of saving rest. All right, number 3. Stay with me. I'm going to use some rollover minutes. I'll tighten things up next week. I need you to hear this one. Number 3, play. God made me to laugh, eat, dance, and play. God made you to eat, dance, laugh, and play. You say, well, I don't dance. Look, even Trump dances. Okay, I shouldn't have said that. Guys, look, you're like, I don't dance, I'm cool. Hey, find some freedom. God made you to laugh and enjoy life and to play. And here, this might be the most important point of the sermon for some of you. Because you were taught not to play. Not to have fun on the Lord's day. They didn't play on the Sabbath day. We don't play on the Lord's day. Some of you were taught in such a deep, formative way that you're having a hard time with me even saying this out loud, right? You were taught not to play on the Lord's day because it is a holy day. The Westminster Catechism just comes right out and forbids recreation. Straight up forbids recreation of any kind. Forming a brand of Christianity that, ironically, does not allow you to play on what ought to be your most favorite day of the week. To me, that's confusing. To me, that's really challenging. I think one of the most helpful Old Testament passages on this is in Isaiah 58. Listen to this. We'll throw it on the screen. You don't have to turn there. If you honor Sabbath, not going your own ways or seeking your own pleasure or talking idly, then you shall take delight in the Lord. If you honor Sabbath, not going your own ways or seeking your own pleasure. Okay, so that's where they got it. Now, if you read pleasure as recreation or play, well, then it makes sense that you'd forbid recreation or play on the Sabbath day. But I don't think that's the right reading of that. I love the way John Frame explains this, and he's kind of unpacking it. Pleasure in Isaiah 58:13, which is mentioned 2 times, it's not a pleasant or unpleasant contrast. It's a matter of your own will over against God's will. You can see it in the text. Seeking your own pleasure rather than delighting in God. There are so many fun and playful things that could be done on Sabbath rest, in Sabbath rest mode, that are gifts from God. If you were to see them as something He gave you that you might delight in and give it back to Him, rather than seeking your own pleasure, driven by your own will, driven by your own desires. God wants, listen, Sabbath rest is about God reclaiming and redeeming all of the amazing gifts He's given you for life. Not compartmentalizing. I'm going to live this way all week long, have play, have fun, and then I'm going to come to church and be sour and dour, and I'm not allowed to do these things. Somebody was telling me in the first service, he had a friend who wasn't allowed to do anything on Sunday. Anything. And how it must have colored his understanding of the gospel and been really confusing. Let Isaiah 58, for those of you who need to hear this, let Isaiah 58 collide with your own understanding of what Sabbath rest truly is, and land on the delight of God. Then you shall delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride on the heights of the earth. That's not inactivity. That's cruising with Jesus. Like, that's an amazing concept. Personally, I think we have a really strong word in Isaiah 58 that play is a form of rest. Play can be a true form of rest. Recreation can be truly restorative. You know this intuitively. You've felt it. You're like, I need to go for a bike ride. You're like, I need to go for a long walk. I need some space. You felt this. Listen, what you're saying to yourself is the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That's Jesus. The Sabbath was made for your delight. The Sabbath was made for your delight and your enjoyment. So much so that John Frame will go on and write, by its very nature, the Sabbath is a feast, not a fast, a time of abundance, not deprivation, a time of delight, a time of play, a time of joy. Oh yes, there's a difference between feasting before the Lord and mere secular entertainment. That's where you need to work this out. You need to start discerning that. Sabbath is a holy day unto the Lord. Can you do these things and it be pleasing to God? Whenever God's people celebrate great events, they play, he writes. Think about David dancing before the Lord as the ark comes into Jerusalem. Think about the emphasis in the Psalms of rejoicing over and over again before God, singing and dancing that follows the Exodus 15 deliverance. Rejoicing in the New Testament over sinners. And Jesus partying in the Gospels. Jesus going to parties in the Gospels. Mathew, in the same section, back up in chapter 11, verse 19. Jesus had such a celebratory perspective on life that he was not afraid to go to parties. He wasn't afraid to go to parties. Jesus would go to parties, be misunderstood by people. In fact, it was said of Jesus, he, the Son of Man, came eating and drinking. Look at him. He's a glutton. He's a drunkard. Tax collectors and sinners are his friends. Yet wisdom is justified by her deeds. Jesus was the happiest man in the world, was not afraid to go to a party, was not a glutton, and never got drunk. Now you got to work that into your Sabbath rest. You got to figure that out. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Now, I'm running a risk on two edges. One, I've said something hard to those who need to hear it, who were taught that we shouldn't play on the Sabbath. I'm also running a risk with some of you who that's the last thing you need to hear. Like you're like, okay, I went to church today and the pastor said Sunday is play day. Let's go. And you're already booking stuff. You're like NASCAR race, golf trip, vacation, lake, okay? You're just boom, 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 all this stuff. Like, I don't have to come to church. I just rest in Jesus. I mean, that's what he said. Saving rest is found in Jesus. I don't have to come to church. That would be a gross misunderstanding of rest. Point one, worship. Point number two, and play. Point number three. So here's what I'm saying. Wherever you are, you got to figure out how to let God restore you through Sabbath rest in ways that are pleasing to him. And what I'm finding is the more you delight in him, the more he recreates every good thing he gave to us. And then he not only recreates that in us, something we can beautifully enjoy, but he calibrates that according to his pleasure, not my pleasure. So I get the blessing of delight and good pleasure, but I'm not just running crazy with it. It has good boundaries because of the one who gave it. Does this make sense? I got to give you this last point. Oh man, this is so good. God made you to show mercy to other people. That's it. That's the fourth point. And that is there's such a big theme in the Old Testament, mercy, mercy, mercy. It shows up over and over again, especially in relation to Sabbath. It shows up in the New Testament. In Exodus 20, verse 10, you're not the only one who gets to rest. It's the whole community. It's your family. It's the stranger. It's the livestock. Everyone gets, it has humanitarian implications. Sabbath rest is for the community. Mercy is to be extended in that way. Mercy was also prominent in the sabbatical years of the Old Testament. Oh, that just so many places that mercy is prominent in the rest cycle in the Old Testament. The rhythm also continues into the New Testament. So that's why I think Jesus in Matthew 12 says what he does about mercy. Right? Mercy, Jesus says, look, if you had known what this means, chapter 12, verse 7, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you wouldn't have misunderstood the Sabbath. Works of mercy, I'll give it to you in a sentence. Yeah, he's quoting Hosea 6:6. Works of mercy were not only appropriate on the Sabbath day, they embody the nature and essence of Sabbath rest. Works of mercy embody, make this connection. Works of mercy toward other people in need, they express the essence of Sabbath rest. You're trying to bring someone to healing and restoration. That's rest. By definition, mercy is restorative. What could be more in keeping with Sabbath than helping someone discover healing and restoration, what they've been anxious about over and over and over again and are truly in need? Which is exactly what Jesus does in the next paragraph. He's like, okay, now that I've said this, let's go heal somebody. That happens in the Gospels. That's the very next step. All right, so this is the last thing. I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for your patience. Stay tuned. Stay with me. Some of you are struggling. Can I have 3 more minutes? 4? Mercy is how you can express the rest of God toward other people. Practically. Yesterday, in Rocky Mount, we went to Pastor Chip's father's funeral. And here's Pastor Chip's dad. He was known as a man of mercy. He was a law enforcement officer, a captain, finishing his career out the last decade or so as a captain, maybe longer, in the Rocky Mount Police Force. He was not just known as a faithful officer, but he was known as a man of mercy. Listen to Chip tell this story.
The last case my dad worked before, as a detective, before he was promoted to captain, was a triple homicide in Rocky Mount. There were 3 ladies who were working at a church doing Meals on Wheels preparation, and a guy who had spent most of his life on the streets and was a cocaine addict, came in looking for money to rob them so that he can get his next fix, and ended up stabbing 2 of them with a knife, and then a 3rd lady walked in as they were lying there, and so he grabbed her and killed her as well. So 2 of the 3 ladies actually passed away. One was alive, but they apprehended the suspect, and my dad was going to go in and interrogate him to really get him to confess his crimes. They had footage, they had evidence, they just wanted a confession. So he walked in, and the guy was pretty resistant, pretty upset, and the first question my dad asked him is like, "Have you had anything to eat today?" And the guy said, "No, I haven't had anything to eat." And he said, "What do you want to eat? What do you want to eat?" And he said, "I want a filet of fish sandwich from McDonald's and a Coke." My dad said, "All right, let me see what I can do." And so he left, and I guess he had someone, or he went to McDonald's, and he got 2 filet of fish sandwiches and 2 Cokes. And he brought it back into the interrogation room and went and sat across from the guy, and they both ate a sandwich together and drank that Coke together. And my dad said in that meal there was humanity. There was a change in his demeanor from this hardened guy to a person. And as they talked about life and his family in Rocky Mount and growing up on the streets, the man began to open up and confessed to all that he had done, and really just felt like he needed to tell my dad everything. And so as my dad was recounting that, he said, it's amazing what sharing a meal with someone, eating the same thing that they eat, not thinking that they're below you or beneath you, but just looking a man in his eyes and seeing him for who he is will get you somewhere.
Yeah. Some eating the same thing, looking at him in the eyes. He said, that'll get you somewhere. Later on, I wanted to tell you this part. Later on, Captain Baggett received a letter from this man who had been convicted of several life sentences from prison. And what he said in the letter was that Captain Baggett, this guy grew up abused. He grew up addicted to drugs at a very young age. He lived on the street most of his life. He said this about Captain Baggett: the only person that ever really treated me like a human being. And then Chip would go on to say, so the man that was working to convict him of a crime showed him dignity and respect, and that meant something to him. Who does that remind you of? It reminds me of Jesus, the man who convicted me of all my crimes and yet showed me dignity and respect to the place of becoming my greatest advocate. Jesus, the Bible says, is both just and the justifier, the one who both convicts of sin and pours out his mercy. I love this. I love this picture of God's mercy that we see in other people. And God is calling you, listen, God is calling you, if you've met Christ, if you've received his grace, if you've received the mercy of Christ, God is calling you to extend that mercy to other people, to show them mercy. And there's not a better day of the week to remind yourself of that as a habitual rhythm of Sabbath rest than the Lord's Day, Sunday. So one of the things we want to be known for as disciples of Jesus, well, we don't want to be known, you know what I'm saying, but we need to be people who show other people mercy. So I want to pray that for us, that we will practice these habits: rest, worship, play, but don't leave out mercy. Mercy, showing mercy to other people, is so life-giving. It's so life-giving.